Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Garcia. I'm President and CEO of the Connecticut Green Bank. Thank you all for joining us today for the 2021 webinar series, Promoting the Renewable Energy of Community. We have a great program for you today. We're going to begin with a pre-recorded video from Deeohn Ferris, President of the Institute for Sustainable Communities, on the history of environmental justice in America. Following Deeohn's remarks, we will move into a moderated panel led by Green Bank Chair Lonnie Reed, including Representative Geraldo Reyes from District 75 serving Waterbury, Brenda Watson, the Executive Director of Operation Fuel, and John Harrity, the Chair of the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs. These panelists are on the front lines of climate justice in Connecticut. We will explore what got them there and what are they working on to move the needle. We would invite all of you to share your thoughts in the chat on this important topic and pose questions for today's panelists. Rudy and Andrea will be moderating those for us. Next slide. All right, it is an honor to introduce today's keynote address for this webinar. As a member of the Board of Directors of the Institute for Sustainable Communities, otherwise known as ISC, we are lucky and privileged to have found an incredible leader to help communities around the world address environmental, economic, and social challenges to build a better future shaped and shared by all. Deeohn Ferris is an environmental lawyer, racial and social justice practitioner, and systems change thought leader. Her career is rooted in the tenets of racial, economic, and environmental justice. She is nothing short of a trailblazer and someone I've grown to admire, seek counsel, and follow. She facilitated the national campaign that resulted in President Clinton's signing of Executive Order 12898. She was the longstanding CEO of the Sustainable Community Development Group, a social venture enterprise focused on equity, health, land use, and community resiliency practices. Before assuming the presidency of ISC, Deeohn was Vice President for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the National Audubon Society, where she grappled with the environmental and conservation sector's diversity challenges, including helping the organization shift its strategies to broaden opportunities for people of color, women, young people, people with different abilities, and of different cultures. Deeohn is the recipient of many achievement awards, and her public service includes numerous federal committees and boards. We are fortunate to have a pre-recorded video. She is going to share with us the history of environmental justice in America. Rudy and Andrea, let's tee it up.
Thank you, Brian, for inviting me to join you today to be part of Connecticut Green Bank's visionary webinar series, Promoting the Renewable Energy of Community. Brian, you are a dear friend and partner in achieving environmental justice. It's great to be among friends and allies to share a bit of my environmental justice journey, in particular, some about the public policy journey to Executive Order 12898 on environmental justice. It's 27 years old now, and time really does fly. I should let you know that I'm a proud policy wonk. Thinking back to around the time of the order, I was writing some of my first articles on equal environmental protection under law, federal and state policy, legislation, and moving forward with the law. I'm also a proud environmental and economic justice pioneer. Justice and equity are wrapped in my DNA. I was on the ground floor of the environmental justice movement, and I'm very glad to say in 2021, we've come a long way. We're not all the way to comprehensively tackling the cross-cutting factors affecting communities of color and other marginalized groups, but After worldwide protests this past year and the attention focused on justice and equity, we've got momentum to transform the hardest hit communities to build resiliency and achieve success. There are many takeaway lessons from the 1993-1994 Executive Order campaign. I'd say many of the fundamentals for success remain the same. Distilling a few important lessons for today. Number one is commitment to grappling with the lived experiences of people and groups who are hardest hit and the underlying racial, economic, social, and health underpinnings of disproportionate climate change impacts and environmental degradation. Number two is commitment to bottom-up solutions that tackle gaps and leave no one behind. And number three is collaboration and diverse and inclusive coalitions, partnerships, and alliances. The early 1990s were the lead up to Executive Order 12898. Across the United States, grassroots leaders and communities of color were coalescing locally, in the states, and regionally. Community-based groups, regional networks, indigenous and tribal communities, and people in rural, urban, and suburban neighborhoods. It should be noted here that economic justice and community economic development have always been core values for environmental justice proponents. Institutionally, our nomenclature changed. It got shrunk from the environmental and economic justice movement to environmental justice. However, the emphasis has always been democratic systems change, no less than sustainable realignment of the economy and the environment, health for all, and shared prosperity. Organically then, Connecticut Green Bank's mission, Green Finance, is a critical part of this work. In the immediate years before the executive order, the national visibility of environmental justice was on the upswing nationally. We boomeranged from having virtually no environmental justice studies to more and more of them. The United Church of Christ released groundbreaking data on impacts in communities of color. It's this report that cracked open the science and the research. University scholars and experts in the social and physical sciences, many of color, also were cataloging data that substantiated what communities were experiencing. Federal agencies undertook studies that were corroborating. The initial research launched what I call the war of the studies. Research, typically paid for by the regulated community, business and industry, usually came to opposite conclusions. The research and the activism spawned a surge in media reporting. Communities of color and low-income communities and local struggles were getting big media coverage. We were putting the issues on the radar with industry, federal agencies in Congress, and the states. It's pretty much lore that environmental justice is a Democrat issue. Democrats certainly have been the engine behind moving the needle nationally. For the record, though, the earliest federal conversations occurred during the George H.W. Bush administration. The grassroots base building at the time was exemplified by the singularly historic 1991 First National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. More than 500 participants representing indigenous, civil rights, environmental, health, community development, and faith organizations gathered in Washington, D.C. from across the United States, including Hawaii and Alaska, Puerto Rico, the Marshall Islands, Canada, Mexico, Central and South America, and as far away as Nigeria. The summit was an important catalyst of the internationalization of the movement. It was leaders represented at the summit whom I facilitated in the national campaign to galvanize federal governmental action. And that campaign resulted in Executive Order 12898. As you might expect, philanthropy had a role in this period too. A few national foundations funded two law groups. One was the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, which I joined, to launch the organization's Environmental Justice Project, the first national legal project. I was in the right place at the right time to focus on delivering technical assistance and capacity building expertise in service of communities, linking federal and state policy, legislation, and jurisprudence. In the midst of this work, in 1992, President Clinton was elected. I was intentional about institutionalizing a federal call to action by weighing in on the presidential transition. Our own Brian Garcia ably served on the Biden-Harris administration's U.S. Department of Energy transition team. Back then, I worked with leaders and developed 2 transition papers recommending the executive order, one for the Department of Justice and one for the Environmental Protection Agency. After fairly intense, sometimes contentious negotiations, many of our recommendations were adopted by the administration. On the plus side, we had allies on the inside. In the interest of time, I won't catalog all of our recommendations that made it in. It's easy to Google the official document. Summarizing, the executive order is a major milestone that pinpointed and validated for the federal government for the first time the harms to communities of color and low income, amplifying the field and the scholarship, and it set forth remedies. It should be understood that the order is not judicially enforceable law of the land. It has been an enduring challenge to get an environmental justice bill to the president's desk for signature. Nevertheless, while the order is a federal floor that catalyzed states and industries, today we're not as far along as we want it to be. The upside is 12898 is the precursor of what's happening today with President Biden's administration-wide equity, articulation, and positioning. In closing, in honor of being with you today, I'd like to salute some Connecticut environmental justice champions. To Connecticut Green Bank, congratulations for HR 806, the Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator Act. The Institute for Sustainable Communities is pleased to fully support this bill. To Representative Geraldo Reyes, continue to advance Connecticut General Statute 22A-20A, persevere, the law matters, policy matters, environmental justice matters. To Brenda Watson, your Operation Fuel is a model for hardest hit communities. Keep up the fight. Energy justice is climate justice. To John Harrity, your lifelong fight for workers and workers' rights is inspiring. A just transition and a global green economy must include everyone. To Chairwoman Lonnie Reed, keep up your efforts to prioritize investment in the hardest hit communities. Our imperative is a global green economy that benefits everyone. Wrapping up for me then, I'm inviting you all to join the Institute for Sustainable Communities and me for our Climate and Equity series. On September 15th, we're convening 3 outstanding women of color environmental leaders, and they are all Biden-Harris administration appointees. They'll share the inside track of the administration's plans to achieve energy democracy, environmental justice, and just transition. Kudos to everyone who puts their shoulder to the wheel with community partners, and my best wishes for your every success. I thank you for the opportunity to share my insight.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Deeohn, for those remarks on the history of environmental justice in America. Environmental and economic justice, absolutely. It's great to see the ISC webinar series coming up that's going to be moderated by you, including AQ from the Energy Foundation, Brenda from Connecticut at the CEQ, and Shalonda leading the JEDI initiatives at the DOE. So it's great. We're going to chat through a link for everyone to be able to sign up to that webinar for the Institute for Sustainable Communities. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And just a quick note, we're running into some technical difficulties. So I'm going to step in and become moderator for Lonnie. And we're going to continue the conversation here with our panelists. But let me just say a quick word about Lonnie Reed. Lonnie, for those of you who know, is the chair of the Connecticut Green Bank. She was the former state rep for the District 102 of Branford and the former chair of the Energy and Technology Committee. And when we were thinking about a webinar on environmental justice, Lonnie thought about these three people specifically that I'm going to introduce right now that are on our panel. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so we have three panelists with us here today who are going to move from the national picture of environmental justice and the history of environmental justice, as Deeohn just laid out for us, and dive into what's happening here on the front lines of environmental justice here in Connecticut. I'll ask the panelists to go ahead and start your cameras if you'd like. And let me just quickly do a brief introduction to each of them. Representative Geraldo Reyes of District 75, serving the area of Waterbury. Thank you, Geraldo, for joining us today. We have got John Harrity, the chair of the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs. And we have got Brenda Watson, the executive director of Operation Fuel. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And we're going to start off with having Geraldo talk about, what's been your journey on environmental justice to this point? What brought you to the environmental justice bill, and what are you working on? So just give us a sense, Geraldo. I think you're muted, Geraldo. Let me see.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me now?
Perfect.
Oh, we got it. What about right now?
There we go. We've got a bit of an echo, but let's see how it goes.
I think
Perfect.
perfect. Okay, guys. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Geraldo Reyes, state representative from the 75th district in Waterbury, Connecticut. And although I'm no stranger to the environmental justice conversation, but I am new to the legislature side. I've only been in the Connecticut General Assembly for 5 years. But I've taken on the environmental challenges simply because I did not like what I was seeing around in my own neighborhood as it was affecting the quality of air, the quality of life issues that we were living under in the south end of Waterbury. So we're an old industrial town. Waterbury, in its heyday, was the brass manufacturer capital of the world, and we had the residuals of all the industrial revolution behind us, industrial manufacturing revolution, I should say. And a lot of what happened there is basically left us with the worst air quality, high asthma rates, polluted air, really a tough situation. And I spent about 50 years in that area, and I watched it. I saw it in its heydays in the 70s, and I thought everything was great until I learned a lot more about what it was actually doing to our people physically and mentally, and it's exhausting. And in my own family, I have half of my sisters actually have asthma. I'm very fortunate. I am pretty healthy, but we didn't know then what we know now. I would play in the Mad River and the Nogta River when it was green, blue, pink, and that was all from the different chemicals that were in the river from the Scoba manufacturing and Century Brass back then. And these are these are lessons you learn, and you know, I always say that God puts you in the right place at the right time. I happen to spend 36 years in manufacturing, so on top of that, I have the manufacturing background and know and understand where and how we got to some of these places where we are with the polluted air, with the high asthma rates, with the exhaust from the diesel and the different transportation modes. All this plays into the inner city where the communities of color are almost always collectively in the same type of area. And this is also by design. That didn't happen by accident. That was also part of, we'll put these folks right here. And I was very, very excited and happy to see President Joe Biden announce early on in his presidency that he actually said, we will put environmental justice in every single bill that we talk about. We will always continue to have this conversation. He actually verbalized the words environmental justice into all pieces of legislation, which I took that from coming from the federals, coming up from Washington, and I use that as my mantra to continue to fight here on a state and a municipality level, to continue to fight for environmental justice gains here in the state of Connecticut. I was involved with an awful raw sewage spill into the Naugatuck River way back when, and it wasn't advertised. People didn't know. So we worked on sewage spill right to know. We worked on environmental justice enhancements. We have a long way to go. We are just starting, in my estimation, just turning the corner. And the Connecticut General Assembly has such great champions like Christine Pond, Joe Resco, David Michelle. These are folks that are on the front line. Travis Sims. We are our own little coalition of environmental justice, if you will, trying to move the needle forward every year, trying to do a little bit more with the bill, trying to get it to a perfect bill, and still working with the industry and still working with the DEP. It takes time. That's the one thing that as a legislature, I'm very, I struggle with that because I want to get to the end result. I want to put the perfect bill out there. But when you're working across aisles and you're working in negotiating, you may not be able to get the perfect bill in one shot. And this is what I'm learning about politics in Hartford. And I can see it playing out also on a national level, that you're trying to do things in a bipartisan way, but sometimes it slows down the whole process. But I got to tell you, we have a couple of issues here in the state of Connecticut. The trash incinerators that we have in Bridgeport and Hartford, they're an issue. The mirror plant here in Hartford is a big issue that I believe is going to be the forefront of what the EJ law looks like here in Hartford. And not only for Hartford, because the poor air quality doesn't stay in Hartford. It doesn't have zip code bounds. And I always tell everybody, I always tell my friends down in Naugatuck, Middlebury, Woken, and all around Greater Waterbury, this is your air too. This doesn't stay, just as it comes from a marginalized community doesn't mean it stays here. We're all impacted. We're all impacted from a health standpoint. And it's just a shame that a lot of these polluted entities are almost always in a low income area, and many of the people that are there usually don't have areas to turn. It takes them a while to try to get out of that particular situation. COVID-19 pandemic only made things worse. It actually threw in a whole other set of monkey wrenches in these marginalized communities, because then we found out that the health disparity didn't help it at all either. So we have to be very careful, because the fine particle pollutions that are being generated here in Connecticut, which Connecticut is one of the, I believe it's the 10th worst air quality due to ozone pollution in the nation. My last recollection was that Springfield, Mass was one of the most polluted cities in the United States. And that's just 15, 20 minutes up the street from Hartford. So that's our air as well. I am dealing with not only with power plants and polluting entities that historically have been polluting entities in the city of Waterbury, but I'm also dealing with an educational piece, having to teach and educate our own folks that how we got here and what are we going to do to get out of here. And that's where I come in. I think that we will continue to legislate here in Hartford, to work with Deep. And I've been on Environment Committee, and I will not leave that Environment Committee until I am completely happy with an environmental justice law that will serve all the constituents of Connecticut and better the air quality for the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Hi, Geraldo. It's Lonnie Reed.
Hi,
Sorry
Lonnie.
for showing up late.
Good to see you. Always good to see you.
No, I mean, one of the things that people tell me about you in Waterbury is that mere mortals can't keep up with you. You are an active member of so many community organizations, and I think you've won 6 years in a row most activist citizen from one of the organizations. Another thing that I read, and I think your lived experience actually for all of our panelists is really critical. You know the issues, but you also have lived it. And I was reading an interview with you a couple of years ago when the transfer station looked like nobody was going to listen, that there was pushback.
Mm-hmm.
And you were standing in your backyard in Waterbury, and you could describe and smell exactly what was happening at the recycling plant, which is less than a mile away, in one of 20 regulated facilities in Waterbury. And then you could smell the waste treatment plant. And so that was part of your summer brew that you were trying to have a nice backyard experience with your family. And then you could see dust from a nearby asphalt company. And so I'm wondering, you were just talking about educating, the folks, the folks in communities that are really being impacted. Is that hard? Are they understanding that shouldn't be the normal, what you're taking in on a daily basis, that other communities are not experiencing that?
Lonnie, that's a great question. And, sometimes you don't, you don't know what you don't know. And there's a lot of folks that have been living under these extreme conditions for decades, and somehow have been on a revolving treadmill, if you will, that they just can't get out of that particular poverty cycle. But I've been very fortunate to not only get out of that particular poverty cycle, but also educate myself so that I can educate others. And there are many vehicles in the greater Waterbury. There are many groups that are championing this cause. And when we took the fight to the streets against the FNG transfer plan expansion, it was one of the greatest accomplishments that I saw was that it was the city of Waterbury, for the first time than anything that I've ever seen, East, West, South, and North all came together to rally for the impoverished South, which is where this particular activity was going on. So I would say that more and more people are aware, but I have to tell you that we still have to continue to advocate and make sure that the least common denominator understands the greater injustice that's being done to them. And that's where I will continue to advocate. And we do it in several different languages, not just in, there's Waterbury is a pretty good mix of diversity in there. So to your point, the education continues, the advocating continues. We will continue to advocate for improved quality of life in the city of Waterbury.
Great. Thank you, Representative. We're glad you're there.
Thank you.
I want to introduce our next panelist, Brenda Watson. And Brenda is the Executive Director of Operation Fuel. And I think as many still remember, that nonprofit was created more than 40 years ago when the worldwide oil embargo sent home heating prices soaring to such levels that so many people couldn't afford to refill their tanks and they were going cold. Brenda has a career that includes 20 years in transportation planning, municipal government, and community organizing. And when she took over as executive director of Operation Fuel, it was still only a cold weather program. And Brenda recognized immediately that many low and moderate income families are struggling with hard to afford energy prices year round, not just through the winter. So through her leadership, Operation Fuel now makes assistance available year round. And this really tells you a lot about Brenda. A little known fact about Brenda is that she loves to run road races. And she runs 5Ks and half marathons, and she belongs to the national group Black Girls Run. And after several races, Brenda advised Black Girls Run to make their races a more valuable experience for all the runners, not just the fastest runners. And they have, and it's become very successful. So Brenda calls herself a proud back of the pack runner and says it's important for all of us to remind ourselves in life that we are not all starting from the same line. So Brenda, you know, that's just one of the many sensitivities that you've brought to this whole area, and you've expanded the whole mission of Operation Fuel. And talk about that a little.
Thank you so much, Lonnie, and it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank the Green Bank and my fellow co-panelists, Geraldo Reyes and John Harrity, for sharing this space with me today. So I believe that energy affordability is an entry point into climate change. I mean, there are several entry points into climate change, and energy affordability happens to be one of them. You know, so much focus on environmental justice in the past has been on air quality and water preservation, and energy affordability or burden has become a focus in climate justice and in public health. The pandemic has demonstrated that reliable home energy and access to clean and reliable water are more than just basic needs, that they are in fact essential needs. And in my opinion, not just a public health need, but also public safety. It gets a little scary when energy is down. We lost energy last week during a thunderstorm, and for only an hour, knock wood. But 17 minutes in, literally 17 minutes in, it began to feel a little bit apocalyptic, you know, for us. My daughter and they were scared. You know, losing power is scary, and especially for children. So I believe that as an entry point into climate justice, there's a huge role that utility companies and regulators play, as well as advocates. We all need to be at the planning table together. And for a long time, regulators and investor-owned utilities have been shaping energy policy and regulation from the top down. And I believe what we should be doing is planning from the top down as well as bottom up, because what tends to happen is low-income customers are at the bottom of you know, these decision-making. You know, they're at the end when it comes to decision-making. So I believe that not only is energy a public health need, it's a public safety need, it's also a public good, in that for as long as customers are being mandated to supplement the activities of investor-owned utilities, then, you know, we all deserve a voice in some decision-making. So we begin to use this top-down, bottom-up model. I believe that we close the gaps, and that no particular group is left out and no particular group is centered, and we essentially meet needs. And some investor-owned utility leaders have solved the puzzle of making shareholders happy, as well as serving its most challenged customers. So I believe that the energy sector has had a head start in building a system that works well for them. But affordability deserves a holistic approach, and utilities play a central role in ensuring that that happens. I just want to talk briefly about two large investor-owned utilities who have kind of made their way in this by developing programs and studying this issue. The first is DTE out of Detroit. What they did in early 2020 is start a pilot program working with nonprofit groups to increase the energy and efficiency assistance to folks who typically lose power every year due to shutoff and largely due to affordability. So this pilot program doubles the size of its existing DTE's existing low-income programs. I'll refer to low income as LMI. So LMI means low income. And it's structured to be based on community needs. The program is focused on single family homeowners as well as multifamily owners and residents. The goal is to provide, actually the goal is to bundle affordability payments with energy efficiency upgrades, which includes water heaters, refrigerators, and window replacements or repair. And what DTE has committed to is hosting a series of 3 to 4 planning sessions during the pilot phase to talk about what's working, what's not working. And the program is due to end at the end of December 2021. And if successful, they will expand upon the program. You know, that's one good example of the utilities coming to the table, sharing data with advocacy groups, and even testing advocates who claim that the theory that, you know, combining energy assistance with energy efficiency would reduce energy burden. And, you know, DTE is essentially calling the advocates bluff. And I'd like to kind of challenge our local utility companies to do the same. Another utility that I'd like to highlight is Entergy, out of Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, a very large investor-owned utility. Since 2002, around that time, they've been studying this issue. There's a number of studies that they published, one called The Most Important Customer. And the opening statement of that particular study reads as follows. At Entergy, we believe we have failed anytime we have to disconnect a customer who is unable to pay the utility bill. And when we look at the cost of providing electric service, the numbers tell us that usually there are better solutions than disconnecting and reconnecting the same customers over and over. So Entergy has discovered a long time ago that it really doesn't make sense to try to go after people who cannot afford to pay their bills in the first place. You know, they're spending a lot of time and resources on collection activities when what they could do in an effort to collect on money on a service that they deliver and provide is to, number one, study why there are affordability issues in the first place, and then develop programs around how to mitigate that. In 2008, they published a study called The Energy Efficiency Equals Economic Development. That's a study that I refer to a lot because they actually point to the data that notes that energy assistance, investments in energy assistance and energy efficiency have greater returns on investment than perhaps a factory coming into a town that, you know, provides jobs and economic development. But with energy assistance plus energy efficiency, you get those economic benefits by way of job creation, as well as customers being able to now pay for their bills. Because I can tell you, after doing this work for a number of years, the majority of the people that we serve are not really interested in seeking assistance. They just find themselves in the situation in which they really need it. But if we were to make bills affordable for folks, we would see the numbers decline. And we've actually seen deliverable fuel numbers decline as a result of fuel oil becoming a bit more affordable. It's much cheaper. So we haven't served as many deliverable fuel applicants, I would say, over the last 3 to 4 years, but we've seen the increase in electric customers seeking assistance as those rates have gotten higher. So I believe that utility companies, you know, it really is about the leadership and what the leadership is interested in addressing. And I think that sometimes leadership are just not quite aware or in tune with affordability issues because it's just not something that's on their radar. But hopefully over time that's something we can bring to their attention and hopefully work together. I do believe that infrastructure is the answer. Where maybe 10 years ago, it was a bit passive in how weatherization can assist in not only energy burden reducing tactics, but as a means to also address health and climate change. And then 3 to 4 years ago, you began to hear more about how we need to, yes, we need to address and ramp up weatherization. But then a year ago, pandemic kind of just slapped us all in the face. Equity became this sexy term, and us environmental justice folks and energy affordability advocates began to realize that, yes, listening to the science, weatherization is critical to climate change, because if we're not shoring up infrastructure for the many households who can't afford to invest in renewable energy products like solar, battery storage, heat pumps, and fuel cells, when those become available on a wide scale, we're going to continue to kind of be on this cycle of perpetuating the harm. So I believe that infrastructure for all, and we need to get our leaders, both state, corporate leaders, to be motivated to engineer solutions for these people who cannot afford the upfront costs when it comes to addressing infrastructure within their homes. You know, no one buys a home thinking, you know, I can't wait to address the asbestos that the home inspector did not find underneath the shag carpet. You know, like it's just, no one goes into home ownership believing that they're going to have to do those things. I mean, people understand that there are going to be some investments that they have to make, but having to remediate for chemicals or chemical harmful products that have been installed in your home when it was built in the 50s and 60s, you know, that's just not something that the average everyday homeowner can actually afford to remediate. So I'll stop there so that John has some time to go ahead and speak on his part of the panel.
Thanks, Brenda. Yeah, we got to bring John in here to talk about another. Everybody, as I keep saying, everybody on this team has a lived experience, and John Harrity is someone who certainly has pretty much done it all. He began his career at Pratt & Whitney as a vertical turret lathe operator. And before long, his leadership skills began taking him to key positions in the Machinists Union, where he fought to give workers better wages, more job security, and safer working conditions. For several years, John Harrity served as president of the Connecticut State Council of Machinists, representing more than 10,000 active and retired workers. John is passionate about combating climate change with proactive strategies for creating great renewable jobs that pay well. He co-founded the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs, which he now chairs, and he serves on our Connecticut Green Bank board, as does Brenda, I should also say.
Right.
This year, John helped win passage of Senate Bill 999 to ensure that major renewable projects hire union workers. And despite the opposition of the union's executive council, John also persuaded a machinist union convention to vote to make combating climate change a union priority. One attendee said, "I've never seen anything like the impassioned speech that John gave from the floor to turn that place around." And he called you a visionary. So bring it. Tell us why you became so passionate about this as an issue years ago. You were really seeing it in manufacturing and in the work you were doing.
Thank you, Lonnie, and I'm honored to be here and to be a part of such a distinguished panel. I'm honored to have been invited. You know, I back after I got out of college, I had to decide what I wanted to do, and frankly, I decided I wanted to get into the labor movement because of my dad. My My dad worked at General Electric for 44 years, and he worked really hard, and he seemed pretty miserable actually for a lot of that time. And so I wanted to make things better for working people. So I had a degree in English literature, but I went to a machining course and found out how to run machines, and got hired at Pratt and got active in the union, and then became a full-time rep, and worked on issues my whole life. And I want to tell young people that it is possible to spend your life and actually be gainfully employed working on issues that matter. So that brings us up to 2012, and I read an article by a guy named Bill McKibbins, and it was in Rolling Stone magazine, and it was called Climate Warming's Terrifying New Math. And it talked about what was on deck for us with climate change. And I became convinced, really, after reading that and a lot of other things, about this issue and its importance. And I started talking with working people about it. And at first they weren't very aware of it, but I talked to the first group in 2012, and I told them what I got out of McKibben's article. And I've actually said that to every group that I've talked with about this since, and I'll repeat it today, which is that climate change is the most crucial issue facing all of us for the rest of our lives, And as I said at that convention, if you don't believe me now, think about it. Think about me in 10 years when you see what's going to happen. And it hasn't taken 10 years to see how the climate has changed for the worst. So I got interested in the issue, and at the same time, the president of the Connecticut AFL-CIO, John Olson, was asked to host a meeting with the labor, environmental, and religious representatives who were interested in climate change. And out of that came the Connecticut Roundtable on climate and jobs. And John asked me to keep tabs on the organization, and I ended up becoming a chair. So John, I am keeping tabs on it. The roundtable has grown in strength and in significance over the last 9 years. We started with Governor Malloy, convincing him to repopulate an empty commission, which was the Governor's Council on Climate Change. He had not activated it. And we talked with him and Commissioner Klee from DEEP, and they said, well, let us take a look at it. And then they came back and they said, you're right, let's get it going. And what do you think we ought to do? Which I've never had a government official ask me that in that way so openly. So we became part of the council and the work it's been doing. We worked on stakeholder meetings that were held all over Connecticut to get that going. And we've done some things that in the last 9 years. We helped to secure the constitutional amendment that would put transportation revenue in a lockbox so that it will be used to help modernize our transportation system. And we initiated, along with the transit workers, Transit Equity Day, so that we would begin to focus on, and that's on the birthday of Rosa Parks every year. And it is, it's in order to take a look at our overall transportation system and hopefully to make it better. We rallied labor unions around Connecticut for the march in New York, the climate march, and we had 800 union members from New York go on a special train from New Haven to the march. We pushed to make sure that Connecticut put in a big buy on offshore wind. Initially, they were looking at 200 megawatts, and we pushed, and the legislature agreed that it ought to be 2,000 megawatts, which is really puts us into a game and put us where we could begin to deal with some of the big players in that sector. And as a result, I think we're going to get a lot of jobs out of it in New London and in Bridgeport. So that's very exciting. And we asked the legislature, and they agreed to make those projects project labor agreements, which means that they will be all union workforces. The developers agree to apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs to bring in people from the community that have been marginalized in the past and get them the skills that they need to have successful careers in that field, because there are going to be careers. It is going to last a while. And also community benefit agreements, so that there's tremendous amounts of money that are involved in these deals. And the big companies are some of the biggest players in the world. And they ought to be making sure that not only are they making their profits, but that workers are have good jobs that they can raise a family on. And then that led us to Senate Bill 999, which is called an Act Concerning a Just Transition to Climate Protective Energy Production and Community Investment. And I just want to say about workers in the fossil fuel industries that they're nervous about talking about climate change, because they think that if you don't talk about it, maybe that their jobs will last longer. But it's just not the case. These folks are facing difficult circumstances, and their jobs are going to be eliminated because of carbon, not because we're talking about it. And they deserve a just transition. Just transition means that there's jobs for them to go to, hopefully in the green economy. That means that in the interim, they should be able to get training and education if needed, that they should have income replacement, they should have health care, and even like relocation assistance, those things that other countries do that assure that people move smoothly. And the other area of just transition is those communities that were cut out of those jobs to begin with, the people that were marginalized, communities of color in particular, where they didn't get the jobs, but they got the worst pollution of the energy sector. And obviously we have to address that, but we also have to make sure that those folks can move into these skilled positions with the same kind of support that the energy workers deserve and fossil fuel workers deserve. And so that's what just transition is about. Just a couple things about Senate Bill 999. It's not a union worker bill. It is a bill that says that workers on renewable energy projects of over 2 megawatts should be given prevailing wage. It says that developers in big energy, renewable energy projects should have apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship programs, and particularly aimed at the communities where they are and aimed at people that have been disenfranchised from that type of thing in the past, and also community benefit agreements so that the communities get something out of it. And it's not just because it's right. And I know I've got to wrap up, but this is the important part, is that if we make these jobs, if green jobs are allowed to become a kind of a Walmart basement payment, no benefit type job, then workers will resist addressing climate change. And people in communities of color have had promises made and promises broken, like just for our entire history. So we need to make this an inclusive effort that brings people in, where we all share in that prosperity, because we are definitely going to be asked to make sacrifices, and this should be an equitable situation. So that's what we're working on.
Thank you. And I think that we've all noticed over time that we haven't done this very well. We suddenly decide coal's bad, so we kick everybody to the curb, and people who had jobs that they really felt respected in, that, family, father to son to daughters even, working in the mines, and then we're done with coal. Goodbye, you folks. I mean, instead of really embracing the whole ecosystem of what has to happen, as you say, and bringing everybody together. I want to go back to Brenda for a second, to amplify that thing that you were just talking about, because I know you have expressed, you're in about 1 million boards, including our board, and coalitions and nonprofits and and you've said in the past it's been frustrating to you that there's so much talk and little action, and that it didn't appear that there was enough collaboration going on. Everybody was siloed, doing their own thing. And I'm wondering if you've seen that change in recent times.
Oh, absolutely. I have to admit, as an appointed member of the Governor's Climate Council on Climate Change, the GC3, we started that process in late 2019. And then we had our kickoff meetings in early 2020, and then the pandemic, like I said, punched us all in the face. And that, as a basic needs organization, we had to pivot, and we're a small operation. We were a staff of 10 at the time, and I was kind of like, well, can we just pump the brakes for a minute on the GC3 process, because it seemed to have accelerated once the pandemic started. But in hindsight, as I reflect on that time, as stressful as it was, that process, deep propelling it forward despite the pandemic, was the right thing to do, because what it did was it made folks on the Energy Efficiency Board, folks on the Low Income Energy Advisory Board. At the same time, there was a PURA investigation into modernizing the grid with a focus on energy equity and affordability. All of these processes kind of were happening at the same time, but all of these other organizations also kind of came to the table and were like, well, how do we get together and ensure that each other knows what's happening and what sort of policies we're recommending to mitigate climate change with a focus on equity. So I do believe that the pandemic was sadly one of those once in a lifetime experiences, which is really very tragic for the many people that have died as a result, and households that have been kind of thrust into a situation of crisis because of the result of the pandemic. I do believe it was one of those things that actually drove us together. And that, one of the themes of the GC3 process was to break down the silos. And I find that now there's more communication around how to connect water affordability as well as water protection with climate change and home energy. How do we get the water folks involved and talking to the energy folks? So yes, I do believe that the silos have finally been recognized as a problem, has been recognized as one of the reasons why, as to why voices are not heard around these issues. So I'm very pleased with that as a result.
I'm wondering if Representative Reyes is still with us. I hear he's on the phone. Not hearing.
We may have lost him, Lonnie.
Okay. So, it's kind of dealing with that collaborative aspect of it, because a lot of us have been around this stuff for a long time, and it does feel that we're having some breakthroughs now. They're really real and genuine, and that it's, there's specifics involved in some of the things that we're doing, trying to reach communities. I mean, we were down in Bridgeport recently, Brian and I and some other folks, waiting for that coal plant to finally go away. And, this is one, oh yeah, several years ago it was promised it would be gone. It'd be gone now, and now they're saying, oh yeah, it will be gone, but we still haven't, they still fired it up last winter on the really cold days. So, sort of really trying to reclaim some communities that have really been exposed to some bad stuff. I'm wondering, John, how long do you think getting something really done is going to take? I mean, do you think we're on the road now?
Well, I think we're lagging behind for sure, because the climate is deteriorating at a rate that we had not expected. And so all those dire warnings about, you have 10 years or you have 20 years or whatever, it's almost hard to know where it will all come in. But just doing something right now is great compared to what we had for the last 4 years on the federal level. And Connecticut has always been one of the leading states on this, and and of course the Green Bank is a prime example of the type of thing that we've been doing, and has been recognized nationally and internationally. I do think that we were talking before about people getting together. Our coalition is labor, environmental, and religious, and I tell you what. That makes a difference when you go to the legislature, when you have those three voices speaking out in a united way on an issue. And we want to make sure that we are reflective of the whole community, including diversity and communities that have been pushed out of the environmental discussion for way too long. So another area where we're working, but as our voices come together, they grow stronger. So we have a lot of work to do, and it isn't going to be pretty, I'm afraid, some of it. But what can you do? You just hustle, and looking at the leadership that's of you all and other folks that are doing this work, I think that we have a good opportunity, and we just have to move forward with all due haste.
Brenda, I sometimes when I'm going online to reach you guys at Operation Fuel, I'll sometimes read some of the comments from people of how you save them, the things that happen to families, and they have nowhere to turn. And I'm wondering if there were any particular stories that really made you understand how you had to expand your mission and be a lot more than just, we'll deliver some fuel in December. I mean, to really kind of, help people plan a future with new systems and new opportunities.
Right. So regarding water, there was a family that we assisted who, before the pandemic, were employed. But even before the pandemic and even while employed, found that it was cheaper to have a gym membership and use that to take showers instead of taking showers at home, because of this fear of the water bill getting to be to the point where they couldn't afford it. That's one example. And the second, it would have to be for folks who are elderly, who spent many years with successful careers and now find themselves living on a fixed income, who do very harmful things. They engage in behaviors out of safety, actually not out of safety, but as out of having the inability to pay for water bills by doing things like not paying, using the stove or heaters in places to heat the bathroom, or using the stove to heat the home. Some have actually cornered off sections of their house to keep, a small area warm. But some go months and sometimes even up to a year without heating, and then sometimes without water. And they're living in this. Very often, these people are living in communities that have high incomes. So it's poverty within these communities that people tend to think that they're poor people. But there are people who are struggling in silence. They're living in the shadows. They're very often your neighbors, and they're struggling without you even knowing it. And yeah, there are a number of stories of which people have really touched on, the importance of what we do. But it's also one of those things where, these people have been kind of like just left on their own to figure this out. And when they learn about Operation Fuel and that they actually can qualify for our program, it's much like when people finally have had that knee surgery, they go, I should have done it a long time ago. Why haven't I done this a long time? I should have done this a long time ago. And that's what people say. I should have reached out a long time ago. I've been living in my house for all winter without heat, and not knowing that there are winter protections available to folks who qualify if they just pick up the phone and call the utility company and ask for payment arrangement, or even ask to be coded as hardship so that they can receive that winter protection. There are customers who will pay as little as $5 a month on their utility bill just to keep it from getting shut off, because that's all that they can afford to pay, people who are living on fixed incomes. And I think that the issue with poverty is that as advocates and as regulators and state leaders and utility leaders, we need to get together and redefine the definition of poverty, and we need to take it back from the nasty political rhetoric that has framed poverty as a stain on America, and let's just keep it real, as basically anti-Blackness. That there has been this intentional push to equate poverty with Black people, brown people, and white poverty exists. And in fact, we have more white people seeking assistance from Operation Fuel than we do people of color or Black or brown. So we need to redefine what poverty is in Connecticut and ensure that our programs are designed in such a way that we don't let for anyone to fall through the cracks.
Really, really good points. So glad you're working on this. One quick question, and then I think we'll turn it back over to Brian to wrap it up. But John, I just wanted to ask you, sometimes when I speak to people about our energy future, or renewable energy future, they get this nebulous sort of sense of what renewable jobs are. And so many of them are jobs that people would recognize.
Sure.
And I'm just wondering, talking about that a little bit, do you find them among workers who are in the non-renewable area, that they really need to be educated as well, that there are these incredible opportunities?
Well, I think that it's true that people need to know what the careers are, and that beginning at a school age, that kids need to be shown that getting a college degree in philosophy might not be the best choice. That maybe you want to go to a school where you can learn to be an electrician, and then work on solar installations. And there are solar jobs, and the turbine assembly and maintenance. These are jobs that they require skill. There's some you have to know the safety rules because there's hazards involved. But unless those jobs are lifted up, they're not going to be jobs that people are enticed to
Yeah.
on the basis of paying benefits. For instance, Texas has thousands of wind turbines. Those were all built by minimum wage workers, and that's by companies that have billions of dollars. That just can't be the case. So we have to, at the same time, we have to make sure that there's the training and the awareness is spread about these jobs. We also have to make those jobs better. They can afford to be made better. And, you know, in the 30s, we had manufacturing was the economic driver, but manufacturing was dirty, it was dangerous, it was underpaid until manufacturing organized. And then it allowed a middle class to emerge for a long time in this country. And unfortunately, a lot of those manufacturing jobs have been let overseas, but green energy is going to be the new driver of the economy. And we have to make sure that those are good jobs and that there's shared prosperity. You know, the last 2 weeks we've had 2 billionaires use their profits to take a ride up into space, or almost up into space. That's fine. But I don't know about Bramson, but Jeff Bezos, he doesn't pay very well. I mean, his guarantee is that he'll give people $15 an hour. You know, we need an economy that lifts people up, and green technology ought to be one place where we draw the line and say these have to be good jobs.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Brenda. Thanks to Representative Reyes. This is such a great team, and one of the many things it's great to work with all of you is that you're not just idea bees, you're worker bees. And everybody gets in there and really works hard on every level to get this done. So great hearing from all of you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Brian Garcia. Brian.
Excellent. So we can call them the worker bees, the Build Back Better bees. Great work. I want to thank all of you panelists for today. Geraldo, Brenda, John, of course, Lonnie for moderating. Thank you for that. You know, this is the beginning of an important conversation for all of us here in Connecticut. I want to thank Deeohn Ferris for really setting the table for us, just giving us the history and grounding us in environmental justice and where it all began. And the legality behind it. It was just extraordinary. I want to thank you all for attending today's webinar on the history of environmental justice in America and the front lines of climate justice today in Connecticut. We certainly covered a lot of ground, but as we all know, we have a long ways to go to realize the potential of America, right? This is really about our country realizing its full potential. Yes, 100% clean energy by 2035. Yes, a carbon neutral economy by 2050. Yes, Justice 40. Yes, just transition. So we can and do need to build back better as we're all getting to there at the end. And this is just a start to the conversation. We need to hear more voices in this conversation on environmental justice and climate justice. So this is just the beginning to that. So please do join the Institute for Sustainable Communities webinar that will be moderated by Deeohn and joined by Adriana Quintero of the Entergy Foundation, our very own Brenda Mallory of the White House Council for Environmental Quality, and Shalonda Baker of the Department of Energy. There was a link in the chat there, so click over there and sign up for that event. And for those of you who are interested, we're going to be doing a legislative debrief of what happened in the Connecticut 2021 legislative session. So sign up for the webinar. It will be August 19th from noon to 1 o'clock. So thank you all very much for being with us this afternoon. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye now. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.